There it is. And how are we doing on time? Perfect. Ready to go live?
Think
Ready.
so.
All right. And we are live, right, Eric?
Yes, we are.
Here we
Welcome.
are. Welcome. It's 1 o'clock, Deal Doctor live stream. Eric and I have a very special guest today, our very own Greg Carlson. Welcome, Greg. Nice to have you join us.
Thanks, guys. I'm appreciative of the invite, and I'm looking forward to seeing what wisdom you guys are going to give out here today.
Oh, I think that's actually why we have you here.
Oh, what to say? As Don and I look blankly into the camera, huh?
Yeah. All right.
Okay,
Well,
so
we'll see what we can do.
we've all been there. We've all had the relationships with clients where it started out great, and then it progressed to not so great. Sometimes quickly, sometimes over time. Sometimes we didn't even understand or know what was actually causing the relationship to sour. So today we want to talk about some options and what to do in the process, how to prevent it, and that sort of thing. So I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to have Eric weigh in a bit before we turn to the master.
Right. So, big question. What do you do when you have a client who no longer wants to work with you? Well, my obvious response is, well, I probably don't want to work with them either.
That is the right answer, Eric. I can tell you over my 45 years that the other route seldom works.
Well, what is the other route?
Well, the other route is to decide that you aren't going to let this one get away. They owe you. You've got too much time invested. How dare they? I think they have somebody else in the wings that they're going to game me on this thing. This is just a rotten deal all the way around. And I mean, I think I've heard most of the things that an agent has called up and at one time or another and was in a serious funk because they were going to be losing out on a substantial commission. And the problem is always the commission. Because if the commission weren't there, most people would do the right thing and just let go and walk. And years ago, there's a guy out there, a trainer by the name of David Knox. And Don, you may have heard him say this before, but David just said, move on, and what you say is next, and you let go. And so here we are, we're talking with people that are, their income is based on commissions. And so it's very important that once we get something in the hopper that we get it to a close. And we get that as well as anybody does. And but at the same time, we're also here to serve the client. And I've developed a couple of things over the years. Way back when I decided that this idea of trying to hold somebody to a contract was a fruitless endeavor. And so I created something for myself called the Easy Exit Listing Agreement. And the idea was that I would say to the people, look, I'm willing to give this to you up front because I believe in me. And I'm not worried that I'm not going to perform and I'm not going to do what I'm supposed to do. And that you're most likely not going to fire me because I'm doing what I said I was going to do. So I'm so confident in my abilities that I'm going to give you this easy exit, easy out agreement. And then I would say, and if you're talking with others, I hope that you will ask them for the same thing, knowing that most other brokers and realtors would never agree to this. So it was a it was a win for me to use this thing up front. So secondly, I've always felt that, and I'll be curious to see how you guys look at this, but I've always felt like when I'm working for somebody, if we're days away from a closing and I'm going to get a nice big juicy check and the buyer changes their mind for whatever reason, I mean, obviously I'm stunned, I'm hurt, I'm upset, all the things that any human being would be. But I also know that I have this job and they've said they want out and I'm their agent. So should I then change my hat to say, I'm going to help you get out of this in whatever way I can? And so agents will try this to a certain point, but they'll mess it up. And how they'll mess it up is they'll threaten the seller or the buyer. And they'll say, well, you know, you're going to get sued. Well, I'm here to tell you, it doesn't happen very often. Matter of fact, seldom to none. And I think so. I would rather have agents say, you know what? What's the issue? And I'm going to do my best to help you get what you want. And if you want out, then I'm going to try to help you get out. I can't tell you how this thing will go because not everything is in my control at this point, but I'm going to do everything I can to help you get out of this transaction. And I've done this on the buy side and I've done this on the sell side. And the reason primarily is I'm working for them. They've hired me. If they want me to go forward, great. If they want me to stop and not go forward and find a way out, then I'm going to also do that. And I found that in the long run, and if you're looking at this in terms of the long run, which I hope you all are, there's no win in pushing this. There's nothing but torment and pain and suffering and being ticked off and irritated and not sleeping. And in the end, you're still most likely not going to get a check on this transaction. So why go through all of that? Why not try to win these people over for the long run in whether it's 2 years or 4 years, or what about next month when their cousins or their brother or their mother or their sister, their aunt, their uncle wants to sell and they go, you know what? You got to talk with my person. You know why? This person is filled with integrity. They knew I messed up. I should have had to go forward. They helped me get out of this deal. And I will never, ever use anybody but that person again. So you may lose that one commission, but I'm here to say that I believe that you'll get repaid multiple times over in the future if you do the right thing. And at least they know that you're on their side, but they don't want to feel like you're against them. They don't want to feel for a half a second that you somehow are more worried about your commission than them. There's my 2 cents on that, guys.
Well, I like that
wanna-
view. Don, let me say something here real quick, because I have this great thought. So you're saying there's really 2 paths. One path being future prospecting, right? You're in this terrible situation. You're just going to take care of the person and you're really building your value with someone and the
Exactly.
future prospecting that they might do on your behalf. That sounds like a great path.
Yeah, it's probably time for a confession some 30 years later, Greg, that when we first started working together back in 1991, I stole your idea for the easy out listing contract. I confess, I stole it.
Well, you know what? It was our industry did not have what I would call a great reputation.
Mhm.
And I had moments where I was just embarrassed that we would try to, do this pressure moment where you're just going to pound these people into oblivion and you can see that they're in pain. And it's like, no, that's not my job. My job is helping people. It's not shoehorning or jamming somebody or cramming something down somebody's throat. That just was never my cup of tea. And I also, Don, I hope you've seen over the last number of years that I've employed that same mentality as a broker.
Yeah, you have.
So the path number 2, which is what I want to take, right, is when I'm in those situations, is the victim mentality. I'm PO'd. I'm PO'd.
Yeah.
I want revenge.
Yeah.
How do I
Yeah.
get revenge, Greg?
Well, I think that most people that are into revenge and payback and all the different things, jamming somebody with a sharp stick. My experience is that just doesn't work out well. And I've heard agents over the years, it's kind of a braggadocio thing about, like, well, I've never given a dime up for a transaction to make it work if it wasn't my fault. And I've written a lot of checks for things that weren't my fault, because to me, it made sense to get the deal done and move on to next.
Yeah,
And
if you can invest 500 and make 10,000, that's a great investment.
Last thing I want to do is get back in the car and start driving somebody all over creation again. So, so I think that when you think about that concept of revenge or payback, or there's this thing about, like, I think some people look at this like it's a war between them and their client. In reality, I don't think it is. I think that people start out in a certain direction and they don't really know where they want to go until they're well into it sometimes. And it becomes clearer as they get further and further into it. And it becomes more obvious. And I think they've had an epiphany. And it's like, this isn't right. And so the agents are looking at it that feel those things are somehow like they're doing it to me. But that's not what this is about. You're there to serve them, to help them get from point A to point B, or to point C or point D, wherever they're trying to go. And if they put up their hands and say, stop, I don't think they're doing it to you. So to then turn and think I'm the victim, or they're somehow doing something to me, is a total misinterpretation. And, I guess we could go into a psychology class here about what's going on internally in the head here. But I've always felt that, were there days that I went home very, very disappointed? Were there days that I couldn't make my payments because something fell apart? And I needed that check worse than ever, but I still wasn't going to go down this road of playing the victim. Or we've even seen this recently, and I'm not going to mention any names, but every now and then we catch an agent who I don't think they intended to say it, but what you read is they're really talking about retaliation. They want to retaliate. They want to inflict pain on that buyer or that seller because of what they've done to them. And I'm like, guys, it's not about you. It really isn't about you. And so I think that the sooner, the quicker that we can get past that you're here for one reason, and that is to serve, and to serve at their pleasure.
I want to go back to those are all excellent points. And I want to go back to it, your comment, Greg, that it's all about the money, or the few instances where it's not about the money, whether it's money that you've invested on a listing for photography and advertising and that sort of thing, or you've been out showing houses to a buyer, showing them 30, 40, 50 houses, and they have decided that you're not bringing the magic. You're not giving them the results that they had hoped for, even though they may be looking at houses out of their price range. So all of a sudden you find out that they walked into an open house and they bought it directly from the owner or from the other agent. So the question is, let's take those situations where, and I know that one of the things that I've done over my career is when I'm faced with that, I very often will sit down and have a conversation with them, or even on the phone, say, I understand that your situation has changed. Do you feel as though I was doing a good job for you? And if they say, yeah, absolutely, I say, well, you know what? How about we do this? I don't mind. If I'd be really, really happy if you could just give me 2 referrals this year, 2 referrals for people who might, be looking for real estate. And over the course of your career, I think that most agents will find that sort of trade-off, that sort of request in a very nice way will get you far, far more than retaliation or going after them for recouping the money you spent on photography and so on.
Yeah. And so, there's several things wrapped up in that conversation. I mean, I have felt the pain on Monday morning when they call me up to tell me how excited they are about how they found that for sale by owner and it was perfect. And they're so sorry that, or even worse, they met the person at the open house who they've never met before, who has not put a dime's worth of effort into it. But they felt that if they didn't work with that person, that maybe they would lose out and they'd have a better opportunity to win if they worked directly with that person. I mean, we've all heard these things over the years, and it's like, so I've often said that, the prevention aspect, the education aspect, and having come out of my short career in education, I've always felt that I've been a teacher. And so I, after having been burned multiple times in this, decided that I'm going to be a teacher again. And how I'm going to be a teacher in this area is I'm going to talk about this scenario with the buyers before it happens. And so anytime that you can get in front of it and talk about some aspect of our business that things can go awry, and have that discussion and say, now let me pose this situation to you. You go out and you work on a job doing something for somebody else, and then you walk away. There's only like an hour's worth left on the job, and you show up at the first of the week, and the job's completed, and they paid the other person who completed the job because they completed the job. So what do you feel, or what do you sense? And it's like, well, I'm irritated because I did all the work and the other person just came in and took the cream at the very end here and enjoyed life. And so there's multiple ways, if you stop and think about how you can create an analogy for people to understand how silly it would be to spend all this time with you, to put their trust in you, to allow you to educate them while you're running around town in every possible way you can, and then to have them veer off at the very last second. And matter of fact, it gets even worse, because a lot of the times that you guys both know, what we hear on Monday is, I have a buyer's agency agreement. They're mine, right? And what do we say? We go, well, yeah, and they go, well, I'm going after procuring cause or something else here, or I'm going after that listing agent. They must have done something wrong, right? Well, what we find out is most of the time that buyer didn't tell anybody they were working with anybody. And a lot of times they're going to check the box right on the agency disclosure that says they're not working with anybody and they don't have any contract with anybody. And why would they do that? So that they could get what they wanted, right? And they didn't care how they got there.
Yeah, one of the things we find is that sometimes when agents go out and show them houses, and then they sit down to write an offer, in among the pile of stuff to write an offer is a buyer's agency contract, supposedly locking them in for the next year. Well, if you don't call that out, if you don't expressly explain that to them, that they're now locked into you for a year, they very often don't know what that document is, because they're signing a bunch of other stuff. And we've gone over this with our attorneys multiple times. And so what you're talking about, Greg, I think is really important. setting expectations, explaining the process that we go through, even to the extent of how we get paid and that sort of thing. But it's really goes back to communication, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, it does. And it also takes, it's a process. And you guys know that I love my checklist. And what I used to call my pre-flight checklist, but you guys call it something else. What do you call it?
Scrap
offer.
paper.
Yeah. And I look at these things and I go, there's so many different ways to prevent these things from happening if you take the time. Now, here's the other part. Think about how much money we're talking about today. Well, in 2015, the average commission paid for a 5-star agent was $4,400. Today, at the end of 22, it was just under $7,000. It's gone up. The average commission has gone up 53%. It's not uncommon for an agent today to get a $10,000 commission. And I'm thinking about this and I'm going, how much time should you take to earn $10,000? And if you thought about it, maybe what we all ought to do is take a few more 15-minute segments to talk about some of these things up front and explain. And, we just had one recently that blew up, and it was about, it was about whether it's withdrawn or canceled or expired or whatever, a listing. And my belief is that I'm the pro. You guys are the pro, right? So it's always incumbent upon the pro to do the explaining, to make sure to look at the other person sitting across from you and go, do they get what I'm saying yet? Or do they not get it? And maybe I need to try another way to explain this because I don't think they're getting it. So as an example, if you tell a buyer, or a seller, I'll withdraw your listing. Does the seller have any idea what that means? No. So if the agent allows the seller to think that they can go do whatever they want to do now because it's been withdrawn, and we all know that's not true, whose fault is that? I continuously come back to, I understand it's tough to take the hit when these things happen. But I used to always say, I'm going to learn from every bad thing that happens to me. And so, do it to me once, shame on you. Do it to me twice, shame on me, right? And so I figured that if I'm going to blame somebody else for something, they did it, look what they're doing, they did it to me. Every time I do that, I give up what little ability, what control I have in life. Why am I going to allow somebody else to take that power or that control over me when I had it? I was the one sitting at the table. I could have taken the time to explain this to them. I could have shared with them the difference between advancing and expiration, which meant that they could go out and list with anybody they wanted in the next 5 minutes. I mean, if I'm letting go, I'm letting go. I'm not letting go with a string that they're not aware of. How silly is that? What game are you playing? So anyway, I'm a big believer in taking responsibility, fully explaining the situation, because you're the pro and it's incumbent upon the pro to make sure that the non-pro understands exactly what it is they're doing. That takes time. And I think that we rush around, we're in a hurry. And when you're going to make $10,000, you can't be in a hurry. That's just a fact of life. You can't be in a hurry when you're about to make 10 grand. And if you are, well, then you're probably going to have more of these painful events than you should, than it is necessary.
I do want to talk a little bit about the unusual, the rare situation. I mean, we've talked about what generally happens. But before I do that, I also want to give a shout out to the broker support team and Eric and me and you, Greg, Paul, all of us who are here to help agents save deals, save their listings or buyers agents. We can help you if you get to us before it goes completely sour. We have a lot of tools in our toolbox over the years of being out in and working in this business that might help you actually get the relationship back on track. Reach out to us, please.
That's a great point. Let me encourage them, Don, that you guys are dealing with hundreds, if not thousands of transactions on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis. Your knowledge curve is so far beyond the typical agent. And I know that agents don't always like to hear when they're being told that possibly they maybe didn't handle it right. But your job is to correct them as quickly as possible, help them get on the path, heading for a victory. And it's not there to, you're not there to allow them to do something that we know is not correct.
Yeah. So really quickly, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because we're running down, but there are those situations where the client has demonstrated unquestionable bad faith. They've gamed you. They had you going out showing you a bunch of showing them a bunch of houses, and then they call their brother-in-law who does this part-time, on the side sort of thing. By the same token, you have a listing, a seller who signs your listing contract and then makes up excuses about why they want to suddenly terminate you. And then you find out later that, well, it was somebody had knocked on their door and they want to get rid of the real estate agents. So in extreme situations, what's an agent's course?
Well, it's an interesting thing because I've actually had a buyer's agent from another brokerage wanting me to sue my seller. Well, think about that for half a second. I'm going to sue our seller. There's just something about that is hard to get around and to make sense of. And so in this case that you're talking about, Don, I have seen a situation where an agent has put together a very professional letter and the buyer or the seller has offered something up. I will tell you that to go to court is a non-win because whatever it is that you get, even if you're right, you're still, we have this little saying that you can be right and still be wrong. And this could be one of those situations where you could be absolutely right, go to court, spend the $10,000 and you get your $8,000 commission and you walk away -2. But hey, you won. You proved something, right?
Well, I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it a little bit differently.
All right.
I used to have a client back in Texas, and Charlie was a good old boy, and he had a lot of really, really fun sayings that I've remembered. And one of his favorite sayings was, "You can attract more butterflies with sugar water than you can with motor oil."
Yeah.
Which is kind of a twist on the more attract more bees with sugar than or honey than sugar or whatever. But the point is, doing the right thing, the positive thing, as opposed to turning down the negative road, and being good in that situation. Rising above is always going to get you in the long run a better outcome.
Yeah. I've seen one case in our 27 years where an agent came to me and said, I want to sue the seller. It was a commercial deal and there was a substantial commission. And this was a deal where he had shown the property and those two got together and put a deal together on the backside. And he said, Greg, look I'm willing to pay. I realize that all you get out of this is $295. And I'm looking at, $25,000 or $30,000 here. I'll pay for the attorney, but legally, 5-Star has to be the one to sue this person because the contract is with us. Is that where you were going?
Well, yeah, and
We have to legally, if the agent can't do it.
exactly, you're exactly
The
right.
agent can't do it.
Yeah,
And
the
so
agent-
if it's going to happen, it's going to have to be me that says, all right, and then the question is, who's going to pay for it? Like I just said, we typically get on a typical transaction, we get $295. And it's like, I'm really not interested in spending 10 grand to get $295 back. That may sound a little crude, but I wouldn't last long if I did this too many times. So,
and to your other point, Greg, that you mentioned, generally speaking, judges, courtrooms don't generally like it when somebody sues their client. They
No,
tend to look askance at that one.
It's bad form. I mean, I was just thinking about something else you said earlier. This is like a half an hour deal, right?
Yeah, we're rolling. We've got a little flexibility here, but yes.
Okay. All right. So one of the other things I wanted to mention was every now and then a client misbehaves on the phone. And the agent,
It wasn't me this time.
yeah, and the agent has to make a decision. Here's what I'd like to ask the agents. Don't get into a cuss fest on the phone with a client. Don't get into a mudslinging contest on email or text. And surely don't ever use any type of slurs. And NAR has a rule now, 10.5. If you get angry and you make some type of a slur on some protected class here, we had an agent that lost their ability to be in real estate for several months on a personal deal over personal messaging, in a kind of a some drinking, I think, had been taking place, and you can't do that. You have to live above it. You're the pro. For heaven's sakes, don't join in to the mud with somebody who enjoys being in the mud.
Okay, Eric, any thoughts? I'm going to give Greg the last word here, but I wanted to make sure that you got some thoughts here.
Well, if agents want to protect themselves, they can always charge a retainer fee. There's a place to put there that you might spell out that, hey, if you end up breaking my contract, you're going to reimburse me $500 for photos or $500 for auto or gasoline or whatnot. There might be an expectation there that you can put in there, just so that if that does happen and you do decide to go your separate ways, that there's an expectation of what that seller or buyer will be paying you as an agent. Whether it really works or not, don't know, but at least there's an expectation that you talked about it. That's my last words.
Yeah, expectations, communication, really, really important. Greg, any last thoughts here for this moment?
I'm thinking back to years ago. I heard General Norman Schwarzkopf, after he had been the leader over there at the Gulf War, and he was on stage, and he said, "I've got two things that I live by here." He said, one is, when put in charge, take charge. So guess what? The clients are putting you in charge. So take charge. Be the pro. Explain everything. Go over the top. Over-explain. Look at their face. Be aware. Self-awareness is a huge thing that a lot of agents, some agents have a really good amount of self-awareness, but there's some that don't. And it's I don't know if it's innate or if it can be learned, but you need to be aware of what's going on in a situation, how you're being perceived. And then secondly, what he said was, which was really interesting, he said, always do the right thing. And so now you can sit there and say, well, what's the right thing? And then I would say, that's the scary part. That you don't know what the right thing is. And the right thing is you represent the client, take care of the client, explain everything to the client, leave nothing unspoken. I mean, cover everything, cover it, man. Because it's incumbent on you as the pro. So do the right thing. And when they put you in charge, take charge.
Cool. Thank you, Greg. Appreciate you joining
Thank
us.
you.
Eric, thank you. And we will see you all here next week. Have a
Hey,
great
thanks
one.
for having me, guys.
Take care.
Welcome.
All righty.